Hi, everyone. Bob Dietrich here with another episode of the ADHD Toolbox. And it is really my pleasure today to have President of the ADDA Association, Duane Gordon, on the program with us today. Duane, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome. My
a lot
pleasure.
of you, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. And a lot of people that have never heard of ADDA, and we're going to cover that today. You're going to find out what the Attention Deficit Disorder Association is all about, how you find them, and why it's important, and how they can have you, change your life and have you support you in ways that you never thought was possible. Today we're on the program with Duane Gordon, the president of ADDA, and Duane was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD following his own daughter's diagnosis. Duane worked in the ADHD community for more than 20 years, and in 2005 he joined the ADDA's communication team as a writer and later an edited the newspaper. In 2011, Duane joined the ADDA board as a chair of the communications committee. The board elected him president in 2016, and Duane is tireless in building awareness of adults with ADHD. With awareness and knowledge comes hope, and Duane dedicates much of his time to ADDA as to mentoring other adults with ADHD, and that's a mouthful, I'll tell you. So if you didn't get all that, go ahead and rewind and listen again. But but Duane's been around a long time, in other words, and he's had direct personal experience. He's now the head of a major organization that handles ADHD, and we're going to get some real quality information from him. Today we're talking about the family and really adults with ADHD. Duane, can you tell us a little bit about adults that have ADHD, and what are some of the statistics around that?
Well, first, so we know that 4 to 6% of the entire population, not just children, but the entire population, have ADHD. Interestingly enough, about 85% of those people don't know it. So they're struggling, and they don't know why, they don't know what with. There's a title of a popular book that's "I'm Not Lazy, Crazy, or Stupid," because before a diagnosis, that's what many of us think. That's really all that we can do. And I called this, I want to talk about ADHD as a family affair because many people talk about children with ADHD, and for many years there was an assumption that you grow out of it. You don't have ADHD as adults. It disappears somewhere. It doesn't, by the way. And so ADDA was formed almost 30 years ago now to serve adults with ADHD. And I like to say there's a lot of services available for children with ADHD. And that's because they're much cuter than we are.
For sure.
Yeah. Once you get to be an adult, it's like, hey, I know we took care of you through school and we recognized that you needed accommodations, but now you're just lazy. Now you should try harder. Now pay attention. And it doesn't get any easier. As a matter of fact, I often think that it gets more complicated, not necessarily because your ADHD is getting worse, but because life gets more complicated. When you think about, I can remember being in college, and I remember thinking how hard this was, and how juggling all these balls and keeping track of homework assignments and when papers were due, and my party on the weekend, and all of this stuff. It was a nightmare. Now with a job and a mortgage and kids and grandkids, and so, I remember college days fondly, how easy that was. So ADHD compounds as your life gets more complicated. You sort of reach a threshold of complexity, and depending on how severe your symptoms are, at some point, and often this is when a diagnosis happens, you crash and burn. That's what happened to me. That's what happened with many people. A lot of people wonder, so Why is it that adults with ADHD have to hit rock bottom before, they do something about it? And it's often because we don't really know what it is we're dealing with until that point.
What does the crash and burn look like? Or what could it look like?
What could it look like? It could look like my own case, for example. I was married before I knew I had ADHD. As a matter of fact, I had 2 kids before I was diagnosed. My youngest was diagnosed, and that was what finally explained what was going on with me. But my life was very unstable. I couldn't keep a job. I would get fired or quit or change my mind. We lived in Montreal, and I saw the movie Teachers by Nick Nolte. I said to my wife, how cool would that be to be a teacher like that? A couple weeks later, I went to visit my friend. I was his best man at his wedding. While I was there, I saw an ad for a teacher's position. I applied. I got the job. I told my wife, and we're packing up the family and moving because I've decided now that teaching would be fun. Did I have any qualifications as a teacher? I did not. Did I have any history as a teacher? I did not. And we moved 4,000 miles to do this. Okay. Anyway, I could go on, but
yeah,
crashing and then we ended up in a little island, Newfoundland, off the coast of Canada. Lost all of our savings. We lived in a crappy house because we had just bought a new house in Montreal, and I said, no, we have to sell it because I've decided I want to be a teacher. And it's always just hopping from one thing to another. You can't stay focused long enough, and if you get bored, you're gone. But crash and burn looks different for everybody, but that was my own particular case. When I finally moved back, and my daughter was diagnosed as she was starting school, my wife put her foot down and said, okay, we know what this is. We've got to deal with it. Go to work. You're keeping this job. That's it. I have to give these kids some stability. They're both in school now. We can't just leave at the drop of a hat. Fine. I will do that. And then as the job, sticking with a job wasn't as easy as just getting the job. A lot of people like to say, we interview well. I'm very bright and articulate, and I can convince you of anything. But delivering, that's a different story. If you don't have the skills, that can be very challenging. And so it was challenging. And here I was now. This was the job I was supposed to keep, and I'm this close to getting fired. I've been put on probation. My salary's been lowered when we couldn't afford it. That's what crashing and burning looks like. I've had my wages garnished. I've had the hydro cut off at the house. I've had the phone cut off at the house. It's a bad situation, and you don't know why. Everybody's looking at you and say, but you're smart. You can't have ADHD. You're smart. Yeah, it's got nothing to do with intelligence, and that's the thing.
And that's such an amazing story, because it echoes what we're learning about the children and their behavior and their impulsive behavior, right? And when you have the impulsive behavior when you're a child, you may get in a fight or you may get suspended from school, but those aren't really life breakdowns. But when you have impulsive behaviors as an adult, and you're saying they don't change when you're, ADHD doesn't change when you're an adult, except the consequences gets bigger.
Very much so.
And so that's what the crash and burn is those consequences come crashing and burning down on you because they're bigger than just getting suspended from school. They're losing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, and getting diagnosed as an adult happens more and more often because we're getting better at recognizing. It's slow going, but we are getting better at recognizing. Children are being diagnosed,
Hmm.
then their parents are being diagnosed. That's a very common case. It happened to me, and I could easily point out 10 people that, oh yeah, I got my diagnosis after the kids were diagnosed or after the grandkids were diagnosed or whatever.
Hmm.
Because finally you start, you have a reason to look at ADHD. I mean, that's what happened to us is we started to, as soon as your kid is diagnosed with ADHD, you have a burning desire to learn more about this. So you do the investigating, you do the reading, and in our case, it was, both my wife and I looked at, I remember it for me, it was Edward Hallowell's Driven to Distraction. And I'm like, I don't know about Kiri, but this is my life.
Yeah, yeah.
And, so anyway, and it's really not surprising. Okay. It is not surprising that it happens so often that adults are diagnosed after their kids, because ADHD is genetic. It's not willfulness or laziness or you're not trying hard enough. We have a physical difference in the way that our brains work, and it's genetic. Just like being right or left-handed, just like having blue eyes or brown eyes is genetic, so is ADHD. And as a matter of fact, it's the word for it is it's heritable, which means you can inherit it, and it's 80% heritable, which translates to it's just as likely to be inherited as height. So if you think about, if you wanted to recruit basketball players, you look for the tall parents because they're probably going to have kids who are going to be tall. Well, it's the same thing with ADHD. So many people, the kids have ADHD. It's the first time anybody has noticed. The kids get help. The parents, not so much. It's much more difficult to get help, but it's very common. Okay? Now, the other thing that happens is, and I know that I struggled with this too. We actually talk about coming out of the closet just as much as if we were gay or for any other reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's a label that can affect you in many ways, and it's a personal decision, and it can have a big impact. You have to decide, what is your relationship. I've seen divorces happen because, hey, I didn't marry you knowing you were defective. I've seen people lose their jobs. I've seen people lose their entire careers because of the label. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing that you can do if you don't start wearing a T-shirt or telling everybody that you have ADHD. There's much help that you can get. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why ADA, for example, doesn't publish membership lists or show photos of people who don't want to be known,
right,
etc. We embrace you whether you're out or not, because you can get the help and you can apply what you learned in your life. And we even have, we teach scripts on how to say, I need accommodations at work, without ever saying the word accommodations or ADHD. It's just in the way that you phrase it. I work better like this. There's different options. And you may decide that you don't want to be stuck with that label, or you don't want to share that label. I totally get that. That makes perfect sense to me. I chose to be out with it because, of course, my position with ADA, but I also have a job and I've had a career, and I've worked with my bosses and my company to have accommodations. And ADA actually puts a lot of effort into working with companies to explain ADHD and how there are options besides firing these employees, if they're not performing or if there are other problems that they're facing. if they get help, you don't need to fire them. And it's a lot cheaper to train them, to help them, than it is to fire them. So we do a lot of work around that. But the thing is, we can see some effects, but some of you may not even, some people don't even realize that the things that are happening to them are because of ADHD. And so they don't know to ask for help. And this is why you have to start to educate yourself. I had no idea that, for example, my frequent outbursts and emotional dysregulation was due to the ADHD. But my daughter, my oldest daughter, who is now in her 30s and has kids of her own, admitted to us a few months ago that she remembers what it was like having me as a dad, and how she felt that she always had to walk around on eggshells in the house. And clutter really bothers me. I have to find ways to deal with that and leave the room and stuff like that. But I remember one time coming home, and my youngest daughter had just started to learn to use scissors. And there were those little tiny scraps of paper everywhere. And I put my foot down. I said, that's it. No more scissors. No more cutting up paper. Can't do that anymore. Innocent, but I didn't know what else to do. And when she went to school, it affected her work that she didn't know how to use scissors. They gave her scissors at school, and she couldn't use them. She never had an opportunity to practice because my ADHD was not treated. You don't think about stuff like that. Now, the statistics are much more impressive. We know that adults with ADHD earn about $13,000 less per year on average compared to what we call neurotypicals. We know that Barkley just came out with research this year that says that over a lifetime, I think it cuts like 13 years off our lifespan.
Yeah.
That hurts. I want to be around for that time. And now my kids want me to be around.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't so obvious earlier, but now I'm a much better parent, and they do want me to stick around. So, if I can take care of my ADHD and I can remember we used to joke. So before I was medicated, I've written off 4 cars in accidents. Now, I've never been injured. As strange as that sounds, it was always me not paying attention and driving off in a field or driving into a tree or something. I didn't hurt anybody else, but I've written off 4 cars. Now I don't drive very much, but we used to say, I had to drive with my wife because it was her job to say, Duane, watch the road. Duane, watch the road. Duane, eyes front. So, all of that is going on, and it has severe consequences for you and your family. Right. If you're not doing anything about it.
Right.
Right.
And that's what's so important to understand is that the statistics show 13 years, you live 13 years less if you have ADHD, but the reason isn't because the same reasons as diabetes and heart disease, where you're going to have a heart attack or you're going to die of diabetes. The reason is because of the lifestyle you choose and the things that happen, and those you can change. And that's that's the important thing to know, I think, about ADHD and those mortality rates.
Yeah, and we don't. I mean, and we know about that. We know about the dangerous driving, and we know about the risky behaviors and so on. We don't even think about, for example, compulsive eating. Right. Oftentimes that's associated with ADHD. Right. When I was diagnosed, I weighed 320 pounds.
Wow.
Just about twice my weight right now. And that was just because, when you don't pay attention, you just keep eating. It's very easy. So I would recommend to everybody that if you suspect ADHD, you should get a diagnosis. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, if it is ADHD, there is so much you can do to improve your life. It'll just amaze you. And number two, if you're suffering from some symptoms that are like ADHD and it turns out that it's not, it's probably something that you really need to be treated for even more. It could be, there are like 20 different conditions that often mimic ADHD in certain ways, but are, bipolar, depression, different things that sometimes appear as ADHD. And it would be much better for you if you knew about those and you were getting treated for those. So I highly recommend that if an adult thinks that it might be ADHD, the diagnosis will serve you very well. It's definitely something that you should do. And with ADA, at least once you have your diagnosis, although we actually have a test on our website that'll help you sort of decide whether, could that really be ADHD? We'll always send you off to a professional to get a real diagnosis, just because of all those things that mimic the conditions. But when you're diagnosed, then you can come to ADA for help. And I have to tell you, one of the things about being diagnosed with ADHD, probably the overwhelming feeling after relief and regret. So first there's relief. Oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not lazy or stupid. There's not, at least I know what it is. And then there's regret. Oh, if only I had known sooner. Imagine how much easier life would be. You go through that. But then after that, the next thing that you feel is loneliness. You are alone. Because ADHD is not something, they don't give us hats or t-shirts. You can't walk around and say, oh, there's a guy with ADHD. I wonder how he's coping. Let's go have a beer and talk about it. You don't know anybody else who has ADHD. Or if you do, you don't know that that's what they have, and you're certainly not going to bring it up, especially if you're in the closet, right? So you feel alone. And we've actually done surveys in our support groups. The first thing you feel is that you are the only adult in the world who's ever experienced this. Then when you come to the support group and you start talking with other adults with ADHD, the second thing you're convinced of immediately is that, yes, there are other people who have ADHD, but none of them have it as bad as I do. Because you know your own suffering so well. You know the things that you've been through, and so you feel that, yes, it's I understand these guys all have it too, and they can understand to a certain extent, but if they knew this, or if they knew that. And it takes a while of sharing with people and gaining that confidence to realize, no, they each have their own cross to bear, row to hoe, whatever expression you want to use, and they still accept me. And if they can accept me, maybe I can start to accept me. And that's really the turning point. As an adult with ADHD, when you can begin to accept yourself as you are and move forward, doing what you can do about it, and then just accepting whatever's left. And there are, and don't think that whatever's left is only negative. There are many strengths and characteristics that are associated with ADHD. A lot of research has been done. Yes, persistence is one of them, because we've struggled so long that we tend to never give up. And just to keep going, we have to be eternal optimists. But research has shown that actually we tend to be more creative. And actual scientific research shows that we are more creative, we have more divergent thinking. And with the differences in our brains, of course, that's probably not a surprise, but that gives us real advantages in sort of creative endeavors, like many actors and many artists. We all hear about that, but perhaps one that we don't think of is entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who, it's very often entrepreneurs who break the mold of how we live now and develop brand new ways of living because of the products that they come up with and so on. So that's a huge advantage. And as much as we are unable to focus in a lot of cases, there's also the flip side of that coin, because it's on a continuum. It's never just black or white. One of my advantages now at work, once I understood this, is that I can actually hyper focus and produce detailed quality writing at a much greater rate than most people who don't have ADHD can. Now, I can't. There's a lot of things that I struggle to do that require, focusing on what I consider boring stuff that doesn't interest me. But when it's something that interests me, I can turn that around and use some of my strengths to really excel. And once the company understands that, there's things that you can do. So that's that. There's a lot to work with there, right?
Right.
So that's a huge advantage, and you don't really, just like you don't discover the symptoms that you're facing and the struggles that you have and the source of them alone. Oftentimes you don't know about those strengths if you don't have the diagnosis and you haven't started hanging around with other adults with ADHD who can tell you, well, did you know that you can do this? It often comes as a surprise to them, because the only image they have for ADHD is young boys who won't sit still in class, right? And that's an old image, but it's still what a lot of people think of ADHD. And it doesn't have to be that at all. And it changes for adults. A lot of our hyperactivity goes internal, and our minds are spinning and coming up with creative ideas and good excuses why we're late again, and things like that.
Right.
So that's one of the best things about ADA, is that it's a place to come and, number one, begin to learn about your own ADHD. We have just so much educational resources, all aimed at adults, all brought to you by the leading professionals in ADHD. And it's not all about children. It's not all about how they can survive in school. It's about the real work of making them independent later on down the road and making you into a better adult coping with an ADHD family. Right?
So, yeah. So ADA, it sounds like it's a big resource. You guys also talk about treatment.
We do. And so you can go there and get information about. Actually, you can also find good professionals to go talk to. We're always going to send you to a professional for any sort of medical advice or anything like that. Right. But the treatment, we're not for or against any particular medication, but we're certainly pro medication. The science is there that backs that up. If you need medication, if a doctor says that you need medication, we're all for taking it. I take medication. It has made a huge difference in my life.
You've lost half your weight. I mean, that's huge. That's a big deal. I mean,
absolutely.
And you've gone from a teacher about to get fired to president of this large organization, right? So this is right. Like, I mean, you're just a living example of what medication can do, and how you can turn, this diagnosis, this disorder into a superpower, like some people call it.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to clarify a couple of things. Number one, we like to say pills don't teach skills. So it's not like I took the medication and, turned into, no. The medication helped me concentrate long enough to learn then what I had to know to deal with all of the other stuff, and then to tap into my strengths and really learn to use that. So I like to say it's a long process, but not to worry, you've got the rest of your life.
Right.
It's not going away. That's the thing. You don't ever grow out of it. So you've got plenty of time to deal with it. And at ADA, like I said, we've got all of those educational resources, and then and probably one of the most impactful things that we offer are virtual peer support groups. And we have communities for every ADHD and you name it. We've got ADHD women's 50 plus. We've got ADHD for retirees. We've got ADHD for couples. We've got ADHD and for young adults. And all of these are different support groups that bring communities together. And a lot of people are members of multiple ones, just because the power of being able to go in and talk to people and recognize people who know exactly what you're talking about when you say, you did this, you did that, my boss wants me to do this and I just can't. And you feel judged most of the time. And yet here at ADA, you're not judged, you're accepted because, hey, we recognize it. We've been there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're not judged and you're not alone, like you said, right?
Exactly. So, and we have, one of our memberships is a family membership, and we often see entire families, especially as the children get older and they're starting to struggle in college. Well, we have groups for that, and then their parents come on board as well. They probably don't want to be in the same group because they really don't want to hash out what they've been through at home, but it's great that they get to touch base with their peers. I can remember my first experience with ADA, and at the time, because this was back before, this was in 2005. We didn't have virtual support groups. We only had the conference. We actually have a conference going on next month in Philadelphia, the International ADHD Conference. It's the biggest thing in North America, all dedicated to ADHD. ADA, CHAD, and the ACO. The ACO is the ADHD Coaches Organization. The three organizations come together to put on this live conference. And so I went to this conference back in 2005, and it was embarrassing. I was so socially inept that I wouldn't go anywhere without my wife. If I had to go to that conference alone, I would never have gone. She took me. And when I got there were 600 other people. Now there's over 1,000, but there were 600 other people like me. And there were, I just felt at home for the first time. And from that day forward, I can remember Linda and I were sitting in one of the sessions listening to, and I don't know if anybody knows, Sari Solden, and she was doing a speech. She's the first actual psychologist who recognized ADHD in women, and is very well known for that. But we were sitting in her keynote address, and we were laughing, we were crying, because she touched us so deeply. And I turned to Lynn and I said, that's it. No matter when, no matter where, every one of these conferences from now on will be there. Because it was just so moving for me to talk to people who got what I was going through. And we have. That's since 2005, we've been at every conference. So we'll be there.
Yeah. So now if people want to go to a conference like you did, they can just go hop on a plane and get to Philadelphia in November. And
absolutely.
How would they find the conference tickets if they wanted to go?
So what they want to do is they want to come to ADA, and here's a cool thing. if you want to go to the conference, and there's stuff there for adults, children, you name it, fun for the whole family, you should join ADA because you get a discount, a serious discount on conference tickets. And by the way, we're giving away a trial membership of ADA tonight.
For everybody that's viewing this?
For everybody that's watching this, you can go to ADA's website, which is add.org, and just type in add.org/ADHD Toolbox.
Right.
Okay, and you can sign up and get a free ADA membership. It's good for 2 months, and then after that it rolls over into a very affordable ordinary membership. But because you're a member, you can get a discount. You have free access to the webinars. You can join all of the support groups and try them out and see if this really is for you. You can read all about ADHD and read about, or listen to webinars on medications, on time management, on anything you're struggling with. We probably have a webinar about it, articles, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And with the ADHD Toolbox page, you've got that to try for 2 months, and as a member, you get a discount on conference tickets as well.
That's awesome. And so, as a member of ADA, you're able to do these virtual groups, right? It's not like they got
Absolutely.
they don't have to show up any place in person. They just do what you and I are doing. They're online talking.
No, and especially. We found that this was very important because when you're first diagnosed with ADHD and you're not really taking care of it, it can be overwhelming to add into your life. Oh, I have to figure, I have to clear time. I have to arrange a babysitter. I have to, all of that stuff to get to a meeting. It doesn't matter how close it is. Right. It's complicated. With a virtual meeting, you can dial in on your phone. You can dial in on a mobile device of any type, and it's all on Zoom. Same tools that we're using here. So you dial in on your computer. You can listen. You can watch. You can spy, lurk, or you can participate. And typically, it's not very long before, we've had testimonials from people who said, "Tonight I just listened, but I'm going to hang up now and cry, because I've never felt so connected with a group of people."
That's great.
And that's really the experience that as adults with ADHD have at ADA. We were formed almost 30 years ago by a group of adults with ADHD, and we are still run by adults with ADHD. We really are an organization sort of the people for the people, if those people have ADHD.
Yes, yeah. And this program was initially created for parents looking for solutions for their children. And I think it seems to me, based on our conversation, that a lot of parents start out that way until they realize, A, it's genetic, and B, they may have it too. And where do you go for help, and how do you get that? I think we just answered that question big time in a way where they can go to your website. They can do a self-assessment, although it's not an official diagnosis. It's at least at the beginning. They can get on support groups. They can find different solutions. And they really got nothing to lose by joining for 2 months. So everyone out there, I recommend that you do that. Even if you don't have it, at least you're informed about your friends or other people that may be able to help it, because there's a lot of people out there that do struggle with that, and they can get the solutions. You don't really need to if you educate yourself, find out what it's about, and then start taking action to resolve it. You can avoid those mortality rates and all the subsequent issues that may come up with it.
Absolutely. And we'd love to have you.
Yeah. Well, Duane, thank you so much for all this information. I mean, I'm sure we can talk for another 2 hours, but we don't have that kind of time here.
Right, exactly.
But we do appreciate you coming on. We appreciate the free gift. And if people want to get a hold of you or your organization, is there an email that they can send an email to if they have questions or want to get a hold of someone?
Absolutely. There's always somebody monitoring. info@add.org.
Okay, info@add.org. Now, this organization is ADA, ADDA, but their email, their website is add.org. So don't make that mistake, and you can get a hold of Duane and his staff at info@add.org. You can find everything you need at add.org, and you can click below, and that will take you to the link that you can get the 2 free months trial membership for ADA. So
Exactly.
all right, and on the website, I'm sure you have more information about your conference coming up in November.
Absolutely, and please, if any of you end up there, come see me.
All right,
Tell me that you saw me on the ADHD Toolbox. I'd love to hear from you.
You got it. Thank you so much, Duane. Thank you for being part of this, and thank you again for watching this episode of the ADHD Toolbox. We'll see you on the next episode.